Chapter 3, Act 5 was good. Like, really good. Especially for Genshin standards. It wasn't perfect, but it had actual character development, fleshed out NPCs that felt like they actually mattered, a couple of good villains, good foreshadowing, and some excellent twists to boot. But it was also a lot of information which filled me with many thoughts, all of which was crammed into a really long quest line, which I think people will probably forget pretty quickly because it was a little complicated. So in this video, I am going to start off with a very high-level summary of the Archon quest in chronological order, and then follow that up with a synopsis and analysis of everything we learned from that quest that's noteworthy, which is a lot. And this second section will also contain some theorizing, so just be aware of that. I don't want to waste any more of your time than I have to, and this video is going to be quite long, and I'm quite sure you're impatient to get started, so let's just do that. I will also include timestamps in the description box so you can just skip to whatever section most interests you if you want to do that. Okay, let's get started with the summary, huh? So the quest begins where the last one ends. Nahida had been captured by Dottore, and in order to prevent him from extracting any more information from her, Nahida locks her consciousness away inside of the Akasha. The goal of our little group of heroes here is to both wake her up and bust her out of baby jail. I mean the Sanctuary of Surasthana. Now to do this, Alhaitham pitches a batshit plan, which basically goes something like this. First, Cyno will pretend to arrest Rahman and his mercenaries as a way of smuggling their manpower into the city. Then Dia will go to Pardis Di and meet with Tignari and gather intel on Dottore, while Alhaitham and the Traveler pretend to bust into the Grand Sage Azar's office so they can swap out some knowledge capsules with pre-recorded ones. Seems pretty straightforward at a glance, but things are obviously a little bit more complicated than that in execution. Cyno's task actually goes off without a hitch, but Dia runs into trouble. Turns out Dottore already left Pardis Di after trying to convince Tignari to give him Hypatia. Twiggy tells the creepy Doc to take a hike, and Doc was like, okay, bye, and heads to Port Ormos, where he leaves by boat. Dia and the Traveler follow him there, but it turns out that this was just a distraction because this Dottore was actually a different segment from the one that we were tracking earlier. There were two Dottores in Sumeru, and his leaving was just a diversion. Omega Build Dottore, the one with the deep voice, is still in Sumeru doing stuff, and more Fatui soldiers then show up at Pardis Di to take Hypatia by force. And that's when the Traveler goes back to check on Hypatia and makes physical contact with her. Scaramouche shows up as an apparition, and we'll talk about this conversation in the analysis section, but basically the Traveler questions Scaramouche's motives, and Scaramouche then summons a lightning storm that forces all of the Fatui soldiers to retreat. Tignari is injured here and out of commission, but both he and Hypatia are safe for the time being, so the Traveler heads out to meet up with Alhaitham so they can bust into Grand Sage Azar's office. This part is a little bit complicated because Alhaitham is basically just doing big brain moves here. They immediately get caught by Azar, which is part of the plan, and then Alhaitham makes it seem like he double-crossed us, which is also part of the plan, as is us pretending to be shocked that he's betraying us. And then when Grand Sage Azar boasts about how he knows exactly what we're trying to do, Alhaitham busts out an Oscar-winning performance because yes, this too is part of the plan, and makes it seem like he's consumed a divine knowledge capsule with the help of a slightly modified Akasha terminal. He attacks Azar and misses, which you guessed it, is also part of the plan, and hits a table where he busts out his thievery skills and swaps out the knowledge capsules on the tables for the one he made earlier. So he attacks him again and then lets himself get captured and exiled to Aru village since Azar thinks he's now one of the mad scholars. The Traveler is also captured and sent into the confinement room. But damn, this stupid smirk. I just absolutely can't stand this guy, and I'm so going to pull him immediately when he shows up on a banner. What the heck was that? Anyway, with Alhaitham gone and the Traveler and Paimon in confinement, they are finally within range of the Akasha, so they try to establish a connection with Nahida. The Traveler breaks her free with the power of freedom, and Nahida wakes up. And now that she's awake, the team needs to get her physically out of the Sanctuary of Surasthana, and that's where Nilou comes in. The Academia is banning public performances, as stated in the previous quest, so Alhaitham planned to have Nilou stage a performance right in front of the Academia to trigger an arrest order from Azar. But the arrest command was in one of the knowledge capsules that Alhaitham swapped out. The new order that goes through demands the arrest of Nahida since she apparently broke out of confinement. And this is a lie, though. She's still in the Sanctuary of Surasthana, but the crew dressed up Isak, the kid whose grandpa we helped in the desert, to look like Nahida in order to draw all of the guards into the Grand Bazaar where Rahan and Dia will have a little chat with him. Dia then gets the confinement room key from them, frees the Traveler and Paimon, who then go to actually free Nahida for realsies. Once freed and having been alone with her thoughts for the first time in 500 years, Nahida is angry and ready to put those stuffy academia sages in their place. Good for her. She modifies the Akasha, recovers her Gnosis, and joins the Traveler 2 days later to hunt down the false god, Scaramouche. When they finally do track him down, Scaramouche is in a semi-conscious state, and Nahida immediately takes advantage of this and uses her dream powers to enter his mind with the Traveler. Note, the sages at this point had not been able to give him all of the knowledge capsules that they had been producing in the desert, which is probably a good thing because it means Scaramouche is still himself at this point and not completely lost to the corrupted knowledge in those capsules. Makes him a little easier to deal with. Anyway, they all go through 168 cycles before they finally find a method to defeat him. 168, by the by, is both the number of dream samsaras we went through in Act 2 and the number of ascension materials you need to take a character to 90. Which basically just means that Scaramouche is not leveled at all here, which is kind of ridiculous. Anyway, with all the cycles complete, Nahida ends the dream and calls upon the people of Sumeru to find a way to defeat Scaramouche together, knowledge she then transmits to the Traveler directly. Scaramouche is finally defeated after 168 tries, and in a heartbreaking moment, Nahida takes back the only thing Scaramouche ever wanted in his entire life, which is his purpose. Okay, it's the Gnosis, but still, I don't care if you hate him, watching someone lose their reason for living is always really hard. He's out of commission at this point, literally in a coma, while Nahida and the Traveler enter the Greater Lord Rukkhadevata's realm of consciousness to visit Irminsul. With 2 Gnosis, they have a chance to save this tree of life. At Irminsul, Nahida and the Traveler meet the remnants of Rukkhadevata, not unlike how A and the Traveler meet the remnants of Makoto in her realm of consciousness back in A's second story quest. Rukkhadevata tells them a little bit about the Cataclysm and about Irminsul before asking Nahida to delete her from the records. She's too polluted to continue to exist and she can't delete herself, but she seems to have been able to contain all of the pollution within Irminsul. If she's deleted, the pollution will go along with her, and Irminsul will recover, effectively solving the root problem. Nahida reluctantly agrees, and in deleting Rukkhadevata, history literally rewrites itself. I mean, literally rewrites itself. Everything. We'll talk about this later. But when they exit the realm of consciousness, Dottore is waiting for them there. He knocks out the Traveler and Paimon with a sound wave device stolen from the Academia that apparently doesn't work on gods, but that does work on Paimon, which is odd, and then agrees to delete all of his clones in exchange for the Electro-Gnosis, and then trades information about Tevat's false sky for the Dendro-Gnosis. That seems kind of cheap to me for a Gnosis, but anyway, the end of this quest is mostly just a banquet, wrapping things up, talking to people, having a good old time, Nahida saying thank you, and then a big Q&A. So let's just cue the analysis, shall we? Alrighty, so we were just talking about the relationship between Nahida and Rukkhadevata, which has been kind of muddy so far, but the quests cleared things up. Although, not in the nice and neatest way. As it turns out, my original metaphor of grafting or striking plants was correct in terms of their relationship. Rukkhadevata is an avatar of Irminsul, which as I understand it means that she was literally crafted from one of its branches. This is why she has such a profound and direct connection to it. But 500 years later, she realized that while she could cleanse Irminsul, she couldn't cleanse herself of forbidden knowledge, so she snapped the purest branch from Irminsul and basically created a second avatar of Irminsul, which was basically like a clone, a near identical copy of her. The biggest difference between these two is the fact that they have different fates. See, even if you plant 2 genetically identical trees right next to each other, they would not grow up to look identical. The distance between the trees and other plants, the animals that choose to live inside the trunks, the fungi that shape the surface of the tree, and the direction in which all the branches will grow in order to catch the sunlight, all of these things influence how a tree grows. Nahida and Rukkhadevata started off as the same being, but due to outside influences, grew up and will grow up very differently, and ultimately that leads them to have very different futures. They are therefore different people. It's a real shame that we didn't get a special unique model for Rukkhadevata in the end. I get that she's just a remnant of her former self and that the realm of consciousness is just a reconstruction of her using Nahida as a basis, but still. More evidence for Rukkhadevata having been older in physical shape when Nahida was born comes from her line, "Judging by your appearance, you must have been around 500 years old." This is kind of cool because it means that gods might age like humans do, just at a much slower rate. It's also possible that gods can be born into somewhat blank states, since Nahida was described as having the intellect of a small child when the sages first found her. She then spent 500 years studying her little buns off, trying to meet their expectations, and had never actually taken the time to sit and listen to her own thoughts and ask herself what it was that she really wanted out of life. Was she upset with the sages, angry for her imprisonment, lonely, insecure? Well, it turns out she was all of those things and more, but never really stopped to think about it. But trying to live up to unrealistic expectations in order to feel wanted and like you have a purpose, that kind of sounds like Scaramouche, really. So why don't we talk about my snarky, cryptic, little nihilistic lore dumper? Because it's been 2 years. 2 years of this, my goodness. I will try to keep this on point because I do plan to do a complete analysis on him later, but here are some post-quest thoughts. First off, we got explicit confirmation that he is, in fact, a completely mechanical puppet, which means that the Raiden Shogun puppet is also a completely mechanical puppet. But that makes me wonder if they're gonna pull a whole Pinocchio with him, since he's getting a completely new design for his playable model. Can something that's not even alive even earn a vision? Do we have any instances of that? I can't think of one, and I'm really curious to find out. And speaking of visions, this new design of his isn't just an obscure fashion choice so that he can be anemo-themed. His old design used to use a ton of kabuki iconography, while his new design is full of symbolism belonging to Buddhist monks. This is really perfect for him because not only is it going to symbolize his new life as a wanderer, but it perfectly encapsulates his worldview. A view which, by the by, belonged to Makoto originally, only Scaramouche added a little bit of a nihilistic spin on it. Even his boss fight line, reality is pain, is literally one of the 4 noble truths of Buddhism, namely, life is suffering, which is the first one. In Husk of Opulent Dreams, it says that there are 3 acts in Kabuki, and that Scaramouche's 3 acts are coming to an end in Chinese, because in English it says they're still ongoing, and I don't know why there's that discrepancy. But if you look at this another way, his 3 acts could be likened to the 3 of the 4 noble truths, while his new life as a wanderer is him embodying the 4th noble truth. The first 3 are basically just coping with the idea that life is suffering, while the 4th is suggesting that there is a path that leads to the end of suffering. So you kind of get the transformation now, right? But yeah, I really love that for him. Side note, because Scaramouche and Makoto actually have so much in common, there is a really good case to be made that A, in her grieving of the loss of her sister, constructed Scaramouche in the image of her sister, which is why a lot of his beliefs are a little bit similar. I want to save that for a whole analysis video later, but I want to bring it up now because I think it's really interesting. Now, it may not be very obvious at first, but Scaramouche and Nahida have a lot in common. They were both born because of the Cataclysm, they were both abandoned by their creators, they were left to figure things out on their own, and pressured to live up to unrealistic expectations so that they could become someone that they're not. Nahida experienced a lot of internal and external pressure to become a Rukkhadevata, or something like her, so that her people would accept her, but Scaramouche pressured himself to become a god in order to give himself a reason to live, basically. Both of them are incredibly insecure and never stop to listen to their own inner voices and make peace with themselves, which I think is an ongoing theme because this shows up again with Dottore. But they differ in one really important way. Scaramouche literally hates himself, and Nahida does not hate herself. She just lacks a little bit of confidence. Now, Scaramouche calls the non-god version of himself small and ugly and sees the world as a meaningless cycle of suffering and pain. Yes, he's cocky and arrogant, but oftentimes the people who act like this are extremely depressed and have just given up on life getting better. They're scared, so they just put on a show to, make it seem like everything's actually okay. I think the Traveler is aware of this at some level because they don't immediately get angry at Scaramouche when he shows up the first time. This is in sharp contrast to this encounter that they had with Signora, right? They basically showed up, challenged her to a duel, and then that was it. Like, they were just very, very angry. But with Scaramouche, it's not antagonistic necessarily. Like, the Traveler goes up and immediately asks, "Are you okay with this?" Which is a luxury that was not afforded to Signora. And this line has so much more weight than I can really articulate. It's the question that Scaramouche needs to answer for himself. It's the question that Nahida did manage to answer for herself. And Scaramouche just brushes it off because he's too scared of what his answer might be. He's desperate to be anything other than who he is, and he refuses to face himself. And that's why I think Nahida hesitates for a moment when removing the Gnosis from Mechamouche. She has a pretty good idea of what he's going through, I think, but the removal of the Gnosis is necessary for both him and the restoration of Irminsul. Scaramouche needs to let go of this pointless ambition and do some personal work. But he's not ready yet, and that's why he basically gives up right away once the Gnosis is out of his hands. His face when he falls matches that of the Shogun puppet when being put into standby mode. If he can't become someone else and just erase himself, he'll just sleep forever. And that's why I think this coma he's in is self-inflicted. He's going through that self-isolation period that Nahida went through earlier in the quest, and I think that's a good thing. I expect parts of 3.3 will involve us waking up Scaramouche as well, just like we did with Nahida, but I don't think it'll go as smoothly as it did with Nahida. He's far more broken mentally and emotionally than she ever was. He's got to find a new reason to live, after all, because the Gnosis ain't it, my boy. But there's a distinct possibility that Dottore might be responsible for at least a small amount of Scaramouche's twisted worldview. We already know that thanks to Yae Miko, that Dottore has modified Scaramouche in the past and unlocked his powers, but it's also possible that his tampering did a little bit more than that. Like, if you go back and look at the little cutscene background kind of thing that he went through 3 instances of trauma, right? Like, he had abandonment, he witnessed a bunch of murders of his family, and then even after both of those incidents, he still had enough faith and hope to try to get to know humans one more time when he met up with that young kid that was just like him, right? Like, those previous 2 incidents didn't fully corrupt him, and even that 3rd incident didn't look like it really corrupted him either. There was something that happened after that kind of twisted his worldview. And that's why I think it's possible that something else is at play here. Not that I'm using that as an excuse to absolve him of any responsibility, because no, he needs to take responsibility for things, and I think that's gonna actually happen, and I'm really glad about that. I was kind of worried they were just gonna memory wipe him and we were never gonna have to deal with the repercussions of his actions, and that's not cool. So, yeah, anyway. Dottore may actually be a little bit more involved here is my point. And as much as he pisses me off, Dottore is an incredibly compelling villain. I mean, he's a big-brained, confirmed Sumeru scholar that seems to have somehow obtained some sort of control over snippets of time, which is terrifying, and robotics, which is also terrifying, given that we have all of these instances of what Gondrian robotics can do, and this guy seems to really like those. But imagine being able to yoink snapshots of yourself from different points in your life and just put them into what I'm assuming are robotic puppets, just so that you could preserve every one of your unique perspectives on life. That's crazy. Plus, it seems like Omega Dottore doesn't get along all that well with his other clones, because he's grown tired of their constant arguing. Which means that these puppets are retaining their perspectives over a long period of time, which also means that Dottore is paralleling Nahida, in that all of his clones might have unique fates or futures, even though they all came from the same source, which was him. They could all develop very differently, which can, I don't know, it just makes for some really fascinating potential future plot points when you think about it. Like, what happens if you have 2 Dottores that, like, want to go on your side and, like, rebel against Omega Dottore, and you, like, have this big assassination plot, but then there's, like, this 3rd Dottore that's like, no, I'm gonna get rid of all of you and become Omega Dottore, because I'm the real one. Like, you got a whole Clone War thing going on. Talk about internal conflict, man. Anyway, something I mentioned in a previous video is that it's odd how casual the Fatui are with the Archons, especially Dottore here. If they truly harnessed animosity towards them, wouldn't they be a little bit more violent? Why does Dottore go through all of the trouble of negotiating? Because, like, especially in this situation, we know that Dottore is incredibly powerful and easily at the level of an Archon, while Nahida herself has said that she's not good at combat and is therefore quite weak. Dottore even points this out himself, boasting that he is far stronger than she is, and tries to use it as a point of leverage, kind of. Yet, even with all of that, Dottore agrees even to the huge setback condition of deleting all of his clones in order to get the Gnosis from her. It's really bizarre when you think about it, since Signora just kind of like ripped it out of Venti's chest, even though we kind of think that he let her, but whatever. It's just so bizarre to me, and I can't really reconcile it, because unless the Fatui want the Archons for something later on, and therefore they can't be on too bad of terms with them, I don't really understand why they're not a little bit more forceful. It's confusing. I really expected the whole I'm gonna rip it out of your chest in the Venti thing to be more common, and it's just not. But I guess what's the point if Dottore can just say like, hey, here's a rumor about the sky being fake, give me your Gnosis. Like, if it's that easy, then I guess why bother? But while we're on the topic of exchanging knowledge at a heavy price, what about that whole forbidden knowledge thing, huh? What we know so far is that forbidden knowledge has the power to drive people insane, and it's the source of both the Withering and Elazar. But the terms used to describe its effects are pollution and corruption, both of which have really interesting connotations when you stop to think about them. Now, I do plan to make a more in-depth video on this topic later on, but right now I'm thinking about how similar corrupted file data is to this whole forbidden knowledge thing. Memories and elemental energy flow within the ley lines, and therefore within Irminsul. If you break that down into their core concepts, you basically have data and power, or energy, right? Remove the power from it, and you're basically just left with data. Now, in our modern world, the only way we really know how to work with data is in the context of computers. So if we start to think of this whole memory thing into that as computer data, the context of forbidden knowledge becomes a little bit different. There are basically two ways to corrupt a file, and I'm going to oversimplify here, so, computer science nerds don't at me. A file's data can either be scrambled within all of its existing data so that it can no longer be read by the system, or you can inject a ton of new data into existing data and mix it all together until it can no longer be read by the system, right? The first example is more like corruption because you're corrupting something that already exists. The second is more like pollution because you're putting extra stuff into it in order to make it not readable anymore. Now, given how many computer references there are in Nahida's kit, for example, just from her jumping on keyboard keys with her normal attacks to her skill actually being a cursor and a selection box, this metaphor might actually be more accurate in terms of the way Irminsul views memories as data than we originally thought. It also means that Elazar might be an instance of corrupted data, meaning that the data within the human body has gotten corrupted and therefore it's stopping to work, which is why you get those demon scales everywhere, whereas the Withering might be pollution zones, meaning extra data has been inserted into these zones and therefore makes it go blah, 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 right? Now, what's interesting to me is that in Act 2's Dream Samsara, the traveler left the dream and went outside the city, describing the area beyond it to be a vast, chaotic space. But back in the Perilous Trail quest in the Chasm, Xiao said something quite similar, that all of the spaces there were chaotic, yet connected, just like the dream spaces. And those were domains, remember? And when we tried to contact Xiao from those different spaces, his voice was distorted, not unlike how Rukkhadevata's voice was distorted in the memory that she left behind for Nahida, and we have confirmation that that voice was distorted because of forbidden knowledge. So, I'm starting to think that the world of Teyvat is just a series of small domains stitched together, and that the space between these domains is this chaotic space full of raw, meaningless, nonsensical data that has yet to be processed into something readable. That might be part of the whole forbidden knowledge cannot be understood thing, because it's not actually something that has been made sense of yet. Rukkhadevata also tells us that forbidden knowledge is a type of knowledge that comes from beyond this world, and that it came from the very bottom of the abyss, effectively confirming that the abyss is not of this world, but note that Conria is of this world since Irminsul has records of it. And just the fact that this stuff is apparently from beyond this world, and that's exactly what Dainsleif says in Travail, makes my brain buzz. He literally says we will defy this world with a power from beyond. And Dane, are you seriously trying to use forbidden knowledge to change the world? Because, did you not see what happened to King Deshret? It seems like a big problem. But it also makes me wonder if this is part of what the Loom of Fate operation is. Rukkhadevata did say that fate was the ultimate knowledge, but to change one's fate, in the eyes of the divine, wouldn't that be seen as something forbidden? And since people are constantly making choices and new unknown variables are being added into this equation of life, the future of one person may not be as fixed as we think it is, which might be why fate itself is said to not be able to be understood. And that is something you would have in common with forbidden knowledge. There's something there, I don't really know how else to parse this. Funny data joke. Interestingly, we also got confirmation that King Deshret did not actually go insane so much as he recognized that he had been polluted by forbidden knowledge and had enough awareness to ask Rukkhadevata for her help to prevent his pollution from spreading. This was the first instance of forbidden knowledge in Teyvat, and the second came from the Cataclysm in Conria, and, well, it's the second instance that's been recorded, anyway. Because we have this whole thing now where Irminsul can just change history on a whim. So for all we know, there could have been many instances of forbidden knowledge all over the place. And it might not be that technological progress is what gets nations destroyed by Celestia, but instead the forbidden knowledge. And remember, Celestia destroys things by hurling nails at them, right, from the sky, and also using these big red cube things. So for all we know, there could have been dozens of instances of forbidden knowledge spread throughout the entirety of Teyvat, and we just don't know about it because Irminsul's records have been tampered with. And that's going to be such a big problem. Because here's the thing. In order to completely remove the forbidden knowledge pollution from Irminsul, Rukkhadevata had to be completely deleted from history. Literally, her existence has been completely erased. As far as everyone is concerned, she never existed. It's a fate literally worse than death, since only the Traveler will remember her since they are not of this world, but it's not just the people of Sumeru that have forgotten her. The Aranara and the Archons have too. As far as they're concerned, Nahida has always been the Dendro Archon. She just lost her memory 500 years ago. But for us, the player, things go even deeper. Every mention of Rukkhadevata by that name or by the name Queen Arinyani has been completely removed from every book, quest, paper, bulletin board, and even the Rukkashava mushroom description. You name it, it's gone. Deleting Rukkhadevata from Irminsul in the quest actually changed inventory items. The Folio of Foliage is basically a different book at this point, and it really calls into question just how much our in-game sources and records can even be trusted. And that's not something I really want to deal with. I will mention that there is at least one instance of Rukkhadevata that survived in some weapon lore, which could be an error, or it could mean that items we get from domains and weapons can't be tampered with. We'll see. But in the meantime, I'll leave a link to a great post on Reddit that lists all of the known instances within the game that have been changed because of this event. However, these changes also mean that while historical records may have been rewritten, fictional books may not have. Remember back in the beginning of the game where that one Abyss mage wanted a copy of the Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, claiming that it contained some big secret? Well, it actually might, in hindsight. It might contain a cryptic fairy tale spin on real events that Irminsul didn't update because the book was fictional anyway. In other words, our fictional books may be more reliable than our historical books, and that makes my head hurt. My brain aside, this is actually the second time we've seen Irminsul do something like this, but in reverse. While Nahida deleted Rukkhadevata from history, in A's second story quest, she added the Sacred Sakura to history. In hindsight, Chapter 3, Act 5 added context for how this whole thing worked. The Sacred Sakura did not exist until 500 years ago when it suddenly appeared. Everyone in Inazuma believed it had been there since the beginning of time, except for A, who had been in Conria at the time. We now know that Irminsul can update the memory of Teyvat en masse, effectively rewriting the history of the world itself. Now, Nahida needed 2 Gnosis in order to delete Rukkhadevata from the entire world. But A seems to have only pulled a branch of Irminsul into Inazuma, which could have created a more localized update scenario. She wasn't in Inazuma when this update happened, she was in Conria, so her memory wouldn't have been updated. But Nahida's deletion of Rukkhadevata had much wider reach because A's memories were updated this time. You can check her voice lines to see exactly what I mean. But the fact that the gods themselves are subject to Irminsul's memory updates is kinda crazy, and it might explain why Zhongli calls the Traveler the Witness in his second story quest. He even relays this idea to Xiao, which is why after the events of the Chasm, Xiao calls the Traveler a witness once again. The fact that Zhongli is aware of our ability to not be affected by Irminsul without actually witnessing us going through something like that implies that he understands fundamentally what Irminsul is capable of, and maybe all of the Archons do, but they probably don't have the ability to do anything about it. And now I can't stop thinking about whether or not this is the reason why Guizhong gave him the memory of dust when she died. Being the goddess of dust, this little stone dumbbell thing would have contained all of her memories. So did she do that so her memories couldn't be tampered with? Did Guizhong have access to forbidden knowledge? I'm not sure, but it might be possible. And on the subject of knowledge, did you know that the word Gnosis literally means knowledge? It's an odd thing to consider when you remember Nahida talking about how this foreign electro-Gnosis will only lead to disaster if it stays in Sumeru. What exactly did she mean by that? Do Gnosis need to stay within a certain range of their assigned region in order to not trigger a disaster? Or is it less literal than that? Well, regardless, I'm fairly certain that the Gnosis is a bishop piece. I concede that it could be a knight since it has the iconography of the samurai, and a samurai is kind of like a knight, but I'm pretty sure it's a bishop. And so is the Gnosis, even though we haven't seen it. See, I have a theory. A chess theory. Now, without going into too much detail, because I am by no means a chess expert, I would like to bring your attention back to the Winter Nights Lazo trailer. Now, you see that chessboard with the 2 captured Gnosis on it? It turns out this board is actually a recreation of a famous chess match, 1996's Deep Blue versus Garry Kasparov, Game 1, Move 34 and 35. This was the very first in a series of 6 games designed to test out a new AI known at the time by the name of Deep Blue in a tournament setting versus the then world chess champion, Garry Kasparov. And it was also the first time an AI won games under these conditions, notably the first match. Now here's the actually interesting bit. There were 6 games total in that match, but Hoyo chose to show us the end of Game 1 at the end of the 3rd region of the game. So Game 1 must have included Mondstadt, Liyue, and Inazuma, and since there are 5 games left and 5 regions left according to Travail, that means each region from here on out might just represent 1 game from this series of games. And by looking at the board, we can compare the results of the real chess match and determine that the Fatui are Kasparov, the human, while Celestia is Deep Blue, the AI. Now again, I am no chess expert, so I will not pretend to understand the nuances of the strategies used in high-level chess games like these, but here's a couple of things I do know thanks to Corinth Anime, Jasper, and Cyver, some folks from Discord and YouTube that I got to chat with about this. Now, in Game 1, Kasparov lost, and in theory, so did the Fatui since they lost Signora. This knight capturing the pawn here was thought to signify Raiden killing Signora, but I would argue that this is technically the honorary knight instead, since the Traveler, who is the honorary knight, is actually the one responsible for Signora's death. Raiden just carried out the rule of death to the loser of the duel before the throne. I think this ended up being a loss for the Fatui because of Signora's death not being part of the plan. Now, Game 2 ended with Kasparov taking the win, which lines up with the events of Sumeru. Dottore managed to secure 2 Gnosis and have no deaths, unless you count the deaths of his clones, which I don't think he does. And yes, Scaramouche is in a coma, and therefore no longer part of the Fatui, so you can kind of see that as a loss, but he's more of a captured piece than he is dead, which is relevant because the 2 non-king pieces still left on the board at the end of the game are both bishops. Now, in my opinion, these are the Dendro and Electro Gnosis. Cyver pointed out that the black bishop in this game was unable to coordinate with the black queen piece and was therefore effectively stripped of most of its power throughout the entire game. That fits Nahida since she was literally blocked up for most of the quest. The white bishop, on the other hand, was able to coordinate with its queen and was especially powerful as a result. That makes the white bishop Scaramouche with the white queen Dottore. Both sides took heavy losses in this match, but the one with the most to lose was Nahida, or the AI Deep Blue in this case. So the Fatui end up taking the win. You see how this works? So what does that mean going into Fontaine, if this holds up? Well, Nahida suggests that the Heavenly Principles might wake up if she destroys a Gnosis, right? She doesn't know if this is true, but since the Gnosis represent the laws of the Heavenly Principles, it's at least possible, right? Dottore seems to think so. So Fontaine is a nation of justice and heavily focused on laws and legal proceedings, something that their Archon, Focalors, loves. It's kind of like Zhongli and his contracts and Venti and his freedom. There's a lot of talk about the people there being judged, however, and as far as we can tell right now, Celestia just so happens to be hovering directly over Fontaine, or at least where we think Fontaine is. I'm going to leave a link in the description box to Whale Milk's video explaining how this whole thing was figured out in the first place. The kicker here is that Game 3 of Kasparov vs. Deep Blue had no winners. The game ended in a draw. So does that mean something really bad is going to happen in Fontaine where both Celestia and the Fatui take a really big loss? Is it possible that Celestia will finally show itself in the 5th region and try to judge the people of Fontaine? Or will the people of Fontaine and the Fatui end up collaborating in order to prevent a massive disaster? And what about the end of Game 6? The final game. Kasparov did win the whole match with a score of 4-2, but does that mean that the Fatui are destined to succeed in their goal? I'm just really curious to find out. So keep an eye on this theory. We'll see how this unfolds. I'm also really curious to find out more about the twins because we got a huge lore bomb dropped on us about these twins, which in hindsight feels a little bit obvious now that I think about it. This lore bomb was all about these beings known as Descenders, and Nahida thinks that the first Descender is the Heavenly Principles, and she calls us the fourth Descender. I don't know how many of you play on the PlayStation, but there are some PlayStation exclusive items that you get just from playing on it, called the Wings of Dissension and the Sword of Dissension. And the lore in them is kind of cryptic, but it kind of makes a little bit more sense in light of this whole Descender thing. I've always thought it was a weird naming choice up until this point. But it's extremely strange that she says our twin apparently belongs to this world. But is that by birth or by force? Could history have been rewritten so as to include our sibling in Irminsul's memory? I'm not really sure, but I'm hella suspicious after the whole deletion event thing. Because it's also possible that both twins are from this world, but have been removed for some unknown reason. The Traveler does seem to doubt their own memories, and this is a horrible possibility given that Irminsul can alter memories. Maybe not ours right now, because we don't exist here anymore, but still. The possibility of something like Irminsul updating our memories is kind of scary. Now, Nahida calls the Descenders external beings that do not belong to this world, which is something that we've heard Lumine say before in the We Will Be Reunited trailer. But at the same time, if we don't belong here, then why do we have this suspiciously useful ability to flawlessly master elemental abilities that are native to this world and purify corrupted material? In other words, remove things that are not from this world. Even if we're not from this world, doesn't it seem like we're at least connected to it? Right? But there's something else particularly strange about the timeline of events surrounding our twin, which makes me even more suspicious of all of this. Irminsul says that our twin showed up in Conria and then traveled after the Cataclysm, which is at odds with what was implied during the We Will Be Reunited questline. Dainsleif and the Abyss twins split up because Dainsleif couldn't protect the people in Conria, but that would have had to have happened during or shortly after the Cataclysm. So how then could Dainsleif be the Abyss twins' traveling companion if they split up during the Cataclysm, but the twin traveled afterwards? And if Dainsleif was present with the Abyss twin traveling through Sumeru during the Cataclysm, then why don't we have a record of him along with Nara Varuna with the Aranara? Surely they'd remember him or remember that our twin mentioned him, right? There's nothing. Either the Abyss twin didn't know about Dainsleif's failure until after they nearly completed their journey and he never made contact with the Aranara, or someone has screwed with the timeline, which is actually the possibility I'm more leaning towards now that we understand what Irminsul is capable of. Conria is a part of this world after all, so we know that Irminsul can affect it. How it affected it is another question entirely. And now our sibling's fate is being completely obscured from us. Nahida says that someone is deliberately obscuring that information and that she has no idea who it is, but insists that they must be very powerful. It's so disturbing that the avatar of Irminsul itself doesn't possess this ability and has no idea who does or even how it's possible. That's insane. Whatever's going on here, something is definitely not right. And I think we'll investigate this later in its own video once we've kind of gathered some more residual information. Okay guys, it's time for a super short rapid fire round, starting with the false sky, because yes, finally the events of the 1.1 event Unreconciled Stars has finally entered the main plot. It only took 2 years. Dottore finally confirms what we've long suspected, that the sky is false, something Nahida wasn't even aware of, which again is weird as the avatar of Irminsul, even though she knows she's only been studying things for 500 years. It's still weird. He even says that Irminsul hides this secret, and I'm wondering if that implies that it might have some level of sentience, and that it's connected to the truth of this world, which is apparently what our Abyss sibling and Albedo and Rhine-daughter might be looking towards. And if you want to watch a really good video on this that goes more into depth on how the sky is false and how all that stuff kind of works, check this one out that I made forever ago. It might be hard to believe, but it's shockingly still relevant and probably needs a little bit of an update. It is still probably my best aged video to date though, so I'll leave a link in the description box. You should go check it out. Things that didn't age that well, though, are the Elazar phenomenon. Because it is so strange to me that deleting Rukkhadevata cured Elazar instantly like that. Like, I know it's probably more of a gameplay thing than anything else, but why would Elazar be instantly cured while the Withering Zones kind of stick around? Like, yeah, there aren't any new instances of Withering Zones, but still. They could have at least done the whole, hey, I'm feeling a little bit better, maybe I can make a full recovery thing, instead of just going, oh my god, I woke up this morning and I was totally cured, hooray! It just seems a little bit cheap, I guess. I'm not quite sure what's going on with that. That aside, I do still think that Elazar the Withering and the Hilichurl curse are related, but that's a topic for another video because it's a little bit complicated to explain. This quest just kind of solidified my ideas around these connections, though. But what it didn't do is solidify any ideas that I might have had around Paimon, because she got a whole lot weirder thanks to this quest. Because Dottore said that his sound wave thing doesn't work on gods, but it worked on Paimon and the Traveler. Which means that Paimon is kind of lying when she says she's the god of protection, or it works on some gods but not others. We also know that Paimon is from this world because the Irminsul update worked on her and altered her memories, but it did not work on the Traveler, who is also not of this world. She also appears to be completely immune to corruption and pollution from the forbidden knowledge, which is also incredibly suspicious, and no one's talking about it. Why is no one talking about this? But the Traveler who has this purification ability is not immune to the corruption and the pollution effects. It's weird. This isn't even the first time we've seen this, because in Tignari's story quest, we also see Paimon possessing an incredibly high resistance to the ley line energy that went berserk. It's just so strange because every time we think we understand a little bit more about what Paimon is and how she functions, she does something that just puts her in an entirely new category we didn't even know existed. It's bothering me, and I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what to do with this information. What do I do with this information? I don't know. But hey, whatever you do with the information that I presented here in this video is completely up to you, because this is the end of the video. I feel like I've been talking for forever, so I'm gonna shut up now, but thank you all so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the Archon quest. I'm really excited for future quests in Genshin. I'm very ecstatic for the release of Scaramouche. I've waited 2 years. My god, it's been so long. A special thanks to everyone who watched this, and another special thanks to all members who make this video possible. All of you guys are absolutely incredible. I cannot express how much I appreciate all of your support. Thanks again so much for watching, guys. I will catch you in the next video, of which there will be a lot, so, stay tuned. Bye.